everybody. Good to have you all here. I am just delighted to have a very dear friend of mine come to speak to us today. Her name is Val Griffiths, and we've known each other a few years now. We were discussing it just before. Both our boys have been in spirit almost 5 years, and it's not long after their passing that somehow our paths crossed, and we've been involved in each other's journey since then. Before I invite Val to share a little, I'm just going to read the bio that was done for people here. My son Dan left for our spiritual home on April 30th, 2019. He was a highly spirited yet deeply sensitive child and never quite fitted into the norm. As his mother, I worried about him out of all proportion, considering I had two older children. Dan was different, and my soul knew he wouldn't be here for long. He had many out-of-body experiences when he was young and was wise beyond his years. I believe Dan and I have had many lifetimes together. Since his passing, we have come closer than ever. I feel his presence as if he's part of me. Grief is a difficult journey, but with Dan's help and guidance, I have been able to walk this path with grace. Dan was always helping others, and through our Facebook page, Dances with Dan, Embracing Grief, and a series of grief journals and a book about grief journey, we now work together to help others. That's beautiful. Just before we get into chatting, for the sake of the recording, once we've finished talking and Val shared a story, there'll be questions and answer session at the end. So Val, welcome.
Thank you.
First, before we dive into other things, just share with everybody a little bit about Dan.
Well, I probably have to start before Dan was born. That seems to be the best place to start, because I knew Dan was coming into this world before he arrived. So it's something that I've come to understand as pre-birth communication. Only recently I came across it and I read a book about it.
Can you just, for the sake of people here, what does that mean? Before you were pregnant?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Just give us a couple of minutes explanation on that.
Yeah. So pre-birth communication is when I guess a spirit announces this impending journey to this life before it's even conceived. So it's something I'd never sort of come across, but with Dan, or the name I'd never come across until recently, but he led me to a book which explained it more for me. But with him, what happened, I had 2 children, boy and a girl. I wasn't intending on having any more children. In fact, my husband was going for a vasectomy. So there was definitely more children coming as far as I was concerned. And I was watching a film one day, and there was a little boy on there, and his name was Daniel. And I distinctly heard, when you have your next child, he's going to be called Daniel. And I thought, well, that's a bit strange, lovely name, but I'm not having any more children. So I just sort of dismissed it, but it stuck in my mind.
Can I ask you then, had you at that point been aware of getting messages like that from spirit? Were you aware? You weren't, so you didn't.
No.
You thought maybe that was your own thoughts, or it was just very strange that thought came to mind?
Yeah, my own thoughts. So yeah, but it just stuck with me.
Right.
And came back, obviously, fast forward a couple of years, and I was divorced, and I had a new partner, and very much wanted another child, and I knew. It came back to me then. I thought, this is going to be a little boy, and his name is going to be Daniel. So I didn't have a scan. I just knew it was going to be a boy. Daniel was the name we chose. Well, he chose. And indeed,
Who do you think it was that told you that? Do you think that was
Dan,
himself or your soul
yeah,
family?
yeah, the Soul family, and Dan, of course, a part of it. Yeah,
Okay, okay.
yeah, yeah, that's how I saw it. So, yeah, so when he was born, and I was told he was a boy, and I thought, yeah, okay, well, here we are then, here's Daniel. When I looked at him, I knew him. It was just a real recognition. Different from my other children. I mean, as we know, there's this feeling of love and everything when you see a child for the first time. When I saw Dan, I thought, I know you. And then after the visitors had left, and I picked him up from the cot, and I looked at him and I said, what have you come for? I felt an overwhelming. I've come here for a special purpose with him, you know?
Yeah.
So that's how it began, really. As he grew up, I mean, Dan was a charmer. I mean, he was such a bright, happy little boy. Everybody loved Dan, you know? He was cheeky, just lovely. And an easy child, you know? But as he grew, he was quite, I realized he was quite sensitive as well, you know? And I always felt like I had to protect him, which was, like I said in my bio, out of all proportion. I just felt this need to protect him. And in fact, I was doing spiritual work by then, and I used to put a bubble of protection around him every day. That's what I used to do.
About what age was he then? Are you talking about?
Probably when he was in infants, junior, about 6, something like that. So I put this bubble of protection around him. And I just had this uneasy feeling. That's the best way I can describe it. And it sort of progressed from there, if you like. When he got to about 7, he started having out-of-body experiences. So the first time he told me of that, he'd gone bowling with his grandparents. We'd moved by that time, and his grandparents came to visit, and he'd gone bowling with them. And when they brought him back, they said, oh, he hasn't been very well. He's been really quiet and just not very well. So when they'd gone, I said, are you okay? And he said, well, I don't know. So I said, what's going on, you know? And he said, well, something funny happened to me. So I said, can you tell me about it? And he said, well, I was bowling. So I was throwing the ball, he said, but I was also standing on the side watching myself bowling. So I said, okay, well, don't worry about it. You know, I said, that sometimes happens. You know, I mean, I knew what it was, although I'd never come across it on a personal level. But I said, you know, don't worry about it. It's nothing to worry about. Just tell me if it happens again. And it did happen quite a few times. For quite a few years. He wouldn't always tell me about it, and then he'd say, oh, I've had one of those things, you know? And I'd say, oh, okay, what happened this time? And, you know, he'd say, oh, I was in my friend's garden and I just came out of my body. And he said, and then I went in. He said, we all went in and I went in. But he said, I was out. And he said, I was wondering how I was going to get back in my body. So I said, well, how did you get back in? He said, well, I just sort of forced myself under the door to get back in. So he had quite a few of those experiences, but and he knew, because I was attached to a spiritual center by then as well, and we had a workshop with a Native American, and I mentioned this Dan to him and what was happening, and he said, don't worry, you know, he said, don't worry about him. He said, he's just got this gift, shall we say, he said. And he said, just remember, however far he travels, he'll always find his way home. Now I clung to those words, you know, for later on, those words came back to me, you know. And so I went, and when I went home and I told Dan, I said, don't worry now, I've had a word, and, you know, this is what he'd said. And he said, well, another thing that happens, he said, I know when I go somewhere, he said, I know I've been there before. So he sort of explained he went on a school trip. He'd never been there before, but he knew exactly where everything was around this campsite, you know. So he had lots of things like that when he was growing up. But he was very, and he used to come out with things that you wouldn't expect a child to come out with. So there was just something different about him. But I mean, besides that, he was just a normal, you know, happy child who liked, you know, he loved being out in the forest, and he liked a lot of freedom, and you could never sort of contain him. As he grew older, he had his own sort of sense of self. My other two used to say he was born streetwise, because he just did what he wanted to do, basically, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that became another source of worry for me, if you like, because I realized from the age of about, oh gosh, probably from about 10, that there wasn't going to be any containing him. I just had a feeling, just these feelings used to come over me. And I did a Reiki attunement when he was about, he might have been around about 10 then. And the woman that was taking the class, her child, she had a son, she was telling us, and he had died at age 14. And I just had this, again, it's like a voice sort of feeling, you're going to have to go through that. And I just kept pushing it to one side, basically, all along, you know.
So you'd say that would have been your soul family or your guides, do you think, telling you that?
Yeah. And things that Dan said as he grew older, he told me he wasn't going to have a job. He said, what's the point in working 9 to 5 and then you die? I'm just going to enjoy my life. You know, that's how he viewed life. He went his own way, if you like, and there was nothing that I could do to stop it. I mean, since he's gone over, he's come back and through various channels and told me that, you know, there would never have been anything that I could do to have altered his path, as much as I would have loved to have, you know. But when because by the time he got to about 15 or 16, we had a job keeping him in school. He just had this urge to be free. I think that's what it was. He had this urge to be free. And he used to just say, you know, this is what I'm going to do. There was never anything sort of nasty about it. It was just matter of fact, you know, right. This is the way I'm going to go, and that's what he did, basically, and there was just no holding him back. He said he'd never get old. He told me that on quite a few occasions. So I guess it was always in the back of my mind that he wasn't going to be for the, you know, a long duration, shall we say.
Sounds like he had some sort of knowing about that as well, if he was.
He did. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, there was no doubt, I think, between us, we knew. Because I used to say to him, well, I'm going to be earned in my 90s. Because I've just got a feeling that I'm here for the long haul. And he used to say, well, I'm not, you know. I'm not getting old bones, you know. So I mean, since he's gone, then he's sort of led me to understand soul plans. So for me, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that this was planned for us. You know, the reasons behind both of our lives is still unknown in a great deal, but I'm beginning to understand a lot more about what path
So
this
going
has
back
sort of.
before to his passing then, so you both kind of had a little bit of your knowings coming in that he wasn't going to be here for long, but nevertheless, when it happened, it was still.
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, the thing is, I mean, Dan, he went into drug addiction
Yeah.
from about the age of, shall we say, 17, 18. Started smoking cannabis, and I had this intense fear that came over me when I knew he was, and I know a lot of people do smoke it, but I just had this intense fear when he told me, because I just thought, oh, that's not good, you know. And I tried to tell him, but of course that didn't make any difference at all. This is, this is the way he was going to travel. And I sort of had to bury my head in the sand, basically, because I just knew it would be, how it would end. I just knew how it would end. So,
And look at the addiction has become today. It's a tragedy in the making, and some people that they are some of the wisest, kindest, most benevolent people you could ever meet.
Yeah, and Dan would have been the last one I would have thought, because he was very anti-smoking when he was younger and everything, So I just was shocked, to be honest, that's what happened.
How many years was he in his addiction before he passed?
About 9 or 10 years.
Oh, so quite some time then.
Yeah. In and out, in and out. He did have periods of time where he wasn't, quite a lot. But then periods of time when he was. I don't think he was ever free of it completely, because he would substitute one thing for another.
Yeah.
That's how it sort of manifested itself. And I think, I mean, I'll know the whole truth when I get over there, but trying to sort of piece it together, he lost a very dear friend of his when he was quite young, probably about 18. His friend died in a car accident, and it really, really affected him, really affected him. And he lost a lot of other friends, from drug addiction also, and suicide, and saved quite a few as well along the way. But yeah, I don't feel like it was an easy path for him, but I know he did a lot of good in the circles he moved in. And that's something I found out after he died, because then, of course, all his friends just came out with what Dan was like, and nobody thought that Dan would leave, Dan thought he was invincible, and so did they. And there was a real outpouring when he did overdose, and they said he would never overdose. It's something he knew, how much to take, how little to take, or whatever, So they wouldn't believe that he would overdose. And I mean, it was 7 months before the coroner's report that what he took shouldn't have ended his life. It wasn't enough to end his life. But because he'd been off the drugs for quite some time, then his body couldn't take what he took. Okay. If that makes sense. That's how it was explained to us, that the amount he took shouldn't have been enough to end his life, but because he hadn't been taking it for a while, then it was. But to me, I mean, that's neither here nor there. That was his exit point. I mean, by 7 months on, I learned so much.
Were you aware at that stage you're talking exit points now, and you were
Yeah.
on the spiritual path for a long
Yeah.
time before he passed. So I assume when he passed, you knew he would continue to exist.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
soon
No, there
afterwards?
was no fentanyl. Somebody just said, is there fentanyl? No, I actually asked them to check that, his toxicology report, because I hadn't heard of fentanyl, because it's not so big over in the UK. But when I joined the groups, of course, and I kept hearing about fentanyl, I asked for his toxicology to be checked. No, it wasn't fentanyl. No. By 7 months, by the time 7 months came around, I knew that about exit points.
You did. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, of course, you had that period of 7 months then
there
before
was
the
7 months.
yeah.
And also,
How soon after he passed? Because I think it was quite soon for you that you recognized that he was communicating with you in some way.
as soon as, yeah, I mean, he rang me
I
a week.
thought you were going to, after he passed, he rang me. Yes.
He rang me a couple of days before he passed.
Right.
So I had a message from his girlfriend a week before he passed. Now, he'd been with her for 15 months and he absolutely worshipped the ground she walked on. And I knew when he, this is how my mind worked, or how my mind or my soul told me, if you like. My daughter said, Dan's got a girlfriend. I said, oh, okay. And he said, showed me, if I wasn't on Facebook then, I didn't go on Facebook, but she showed me a picture. Here's Dan on Facebook with his girlfriend, and in my head, heard the voice again. When they end their relationship, that's when he'll leave.
Okay.
Yeah. So I thought, again, I mean, I'm living in fear. I mean, I'm saying it now as if it's nothing, but I mean, all that time I'm living in fear. Anticipatory grief, that's what I know it's termed as, because you're expecting it. So he was with her for 15 months. I met her. She was lovely. And then she messaged me one day and she said, Dan and I have split up. She said, I'm really sorry, but I just can't do it anymore. She was quite a bit younger. She was 18 and Dan was 26. But she said, I just can't, I can't do it anymore. I mean, Dan had suffered from mental health issues, so he was very, very high or very, very low. I got all his medical records after he passed, and there was lots of things mentioned, but never followed up, like bipolar, quite a lot of things that was hard reading for me. And so that's, as soon as I had that message, I thought, okay, he's not going to be here long now. And he rang me, and he, a couple of days later, and he said, have you heard what's happened? I said, yes. And he said, I don't think I can stay now. And I said, okay. I said, perhaps you can try, I said, perhaps. He said, I really don't think I can stay. And that's how he said it. And I said, okay, I understand. He said, I don't love myself. And I said, well, I love you enough for both of us. But I said, I do understand if you can't stay. So I wasn't surprised, really, when a couple of days later I had the phone call.
It must have been very hard for you to hear that from him.
It was extremely hard, but I could tell when I'd seen him a couple of months earlier, he had told me then, he said, I don't think my body's going to keep me here much longer. See? Because the impact of drugs on a body, it can't sustain it. And he had said, I don't think my body can keep me here much longer. And I said, yes, but bodies can recover, because they can, you know. So I said, you know, if you take certain steps, your body will recover. And he said, nah, I don't think so. And that's how he, you know, that's how he sort of got it through to me. It was like as if he was telling me, you know, this is what's going to happen, and just paving the way, really, you know, for the inevitable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did he first communicate with you? How did he get in touch with you first afterwards to say,
Well,
look?
as soon as I was away working, when his girlfriend messaged me to say that they'd split up, I was away working. So I was a live-in carer for a lady with disabilities. So I would live with her for 2 weeks, and then I'd go home for 2 weeks. So this was my 2 weeks working. So I was the other end of the country. And so he phoned me during that time. So I was still there when my daughter rang me to say that that Dan had died, you know. And the first thing I did was say, okay. And I said, I'll ring you back. Literally, that's what I did. My poor daughter. Must have been the terrible phone call for her to have to make. And then I'm putting the phone down, you know. But I was in the bedroom in the house I was in, and I just sat there and I thought, okay. And I just felt him straight away, right by the side of me. And I said, okay, Dan, right, I know you're here. I said, now you just got to get me home. So I arranged, obviously, to have somebody to cover it. My lady was 24 care. And I got in the car. My daughter drove down halfway to meet me halfway, because it was about a couple of 100 miles journey. And I just felt Dan in the car with me. Yeah, but that's the best way I can describe it. I just felt him by me. The journey wasn't straightforward. I had to be diverted off the motorway. I didn't know where I was. I was in the middle of nowhere. And then I went into this service station. Managed to get the postcode for my daughter to find me, because now I was off somewhere. And went in for a coffee, into the coffee shop there. And the song playing on the loudspeaker was Rag and Bone Man, Don't Put the Blame on Me, I'm Only Human After All. And I just, that to me was, well, I knew that was a message from him. And I was just saying in my mind, I don't blame you, because it was his time to leave. That's what I felt like. You know, he couldn't stay. He couldn't stay.
So you actually got that song sign on the same day, in hours?
On the same day, yeah. And the radio, when I was driving, I had an audiobook playing on the radio just to have something on there.
Right.
And that went off and went all crackly, and I said, is that you? You know, and then the audiobook came back on. So he was already communicating with me immediately, really. Yeah.
I'll say for those present, it's interesting, those early few days, and we're all different, you know. The level of complete shock and horror and pain that descends can inhibit your ability to feel or see anything at that time. And that's even if you have a spiritual practice in place and you have a connection already, because like Val, I had a practice and a connection for many years, and I actually worked with my guides for many years before Tommy passed. And within hours of Tommy passing, my guides, within an hour of him passing, they tried to tell me about what had happened to him. That's another story. But so I knew from my own communications at that stage that he was obviously fine. But unlike Val, in those first few days, the shock and the horror was such that all I did is I talked with him. I talked with him on the very first day and every day, knowing that he could hear me, even though the amount of shock I was in, I was, you know, was connecting with my team, but I was not capable really of feeling a lot else. So for everybody out there, they can hear you from my experience and from everything that I know now, they can hear you pretty much from day one. Whether or not you're feeling them or feeling their presence at all, they're doesn't take long. So it's quite incredible that you were able to sense his presence so soon afterwards.
Well, I sat up all night. I mean, we got back, my daughter came, we got back. And I literally sat up meditating all night because I'd had a meditation practice for, oh gosh, since 2006.
Yeah.
And this was 2019. So I was used to meditating 2 hours a day, solid, every day for years, and going on retreats. So I sat up all night. I mean, we didn't get home till about 2 o'clock in the morning, but I sat up all night and I sat up with him. That's what it was, you know. I sat up with him so I could connect with him. And, you know, he told me he'd get me through it.
We actually, just thinking there, because you and I have talked about our meditation practices before the kids pass, and I think, you know, for all those that have taken on learning how to meditate and to quiet and sit after your children passed, you know, without a doubt, I think there is it does help if you've been doing it for quite a fairly long period beforehand, for you to be able to calm your mind. It's quite a you know, challenge to be able to do it afterwards. So all you that are on that journey and finding it's a struggle to learn to meditate, just know it takes time, and it's made much more difficult for the fact you're doing it at the same time that you're going through grief potentially as well. Anyway, Val, yes, so that's probably very much helped you quieten your inner turmoil.
It certainly did, yeah, it certainly did help. I mean, the grief does take over, the reality of it, you know, even though, you know, I was expecting it, the reality of it is completely different from expecting it, is the way that I sort of viewed it. But his presence throughout those first weeks helped me to navigate it, basically, you know.
So did you literally continue in your meditation practice that you'd had before? You literally continued a daily practice pretty much straight away?
Yeah, absolutely,
Yes,
absolutely.
maybe
And
it's your saving grace for the fact that you had that.
Yeah, because when I used to, because I know a lot of people say they can't sleep during the first, you know, I slept like a log. I mean, I stayed in my daughter's in the day, and then I would go back home because I lived on my own. I'd go back home to bed, and my mind would be blank, like nothing in it at all. And it wasn't numb, because in the day I could howl, you know, but in the night it was like complete silence, and I just felt him there. So I wanted, because my daughter used to say, well, stay with me, you know, sleep here. And no, I've got to go back, because it wasn't like I felt he was in my house, but I just felt on my own I could feel his presence more.
So your first sign outside of feeling him was that song, and you knew that song was a communication from him.
Absolutely, no doubt.
And so were you aware of the different types of signs and communications that occur at that point, or was that a surprise for you? It was like wow, I think Dan is trying to communicate with me right now through a song.
Yeah, I'd not thought of signs before. Nothing that had crossed my mind at all.
Right.
I had no need to think of signs, you know. But as each one came, it was like you know it's, you know, and even now, you know, if something comes, it's like comes with a knowing that, yeah, that's from you, you know, that's from you, because, you know, there was so many signs in those first those first few weeks while, you know, me and my other two children were trying to plan a funeral, you know, which in itself is harrowing, you know, and there was so many signs that he was sending us, and the times he made us laugh. I mean,
Want to share
we
a couple of them with us?
well, one we were out in the garden because it was beautiful. It was beginning of May, and it was beautiful weather, so we were sat out in the garden, my son and daughter and myself, trying to plan. Like, I mean, it was a crazy time because you sort of go on autopilot a bit, and then the realization comes in, and it's yeah. But we would said to my son, okay, I don't want anything after. I said, we'll just have the funeral, and I won't be able to bear anything after, you know, no, you know, getting together or anything. I said, I just won't be able to bear it. And he said, oh, really? He said, nothing at all? I said, oh, just maybe a few sandwiches or something like that. And with that, a huge crow came and landed on the fence right behind us and just started making this awful noise. And my daughter lives like in a quite a built-up area, you know, and birds are not usually around there. But this crow just sat there, really just cawing. And my son said, I don't think Dan's very happy with that. I think he'd like a little bit more than that, you know. So there was all sorts of things that he kept us going, basically. You know, he really
That's
did keep us
amazing. It's
going.
wonderful that he related the bird doing that to Dan's sort of disapproval, thumbs down to that idea. He related it to, and that's wonderful for you to have kids that were already thinking along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then my daughter and I, then we had to go into the florist and things like that. We didn't want flowers. I don't think Dan would appreciate flowers, but I wanted to put a rose on the coffin, you know? So I said, okay, we'll have to go to the florist. So we went to the florist, me and my daughter, on a Saturday in the middle of the high street. And when we came out, this white feather just floated in front of us, just eye level, just kept going back and forth across the street. We stood there in awe because there was no breeze, and this feather was just moving back and forth across the street, back, across the street and back. I mean, we cried in the middle of the high street, holding on to each other because it was just so, we just knew it was him, you know? And then after a while, it sort of floated up and floated off over the rooftops. But that's another thing, because I feel like he knew that was really hard for us to do. So he was bringing us something that
I will tack on to that, because there's be people here that also get feather signs, and there are all sorts of ways in the fact you can receive a feather sign, but actually being able to guide it, create the guidance like that, they actually can do. And I have videoed more than once a video of a feather from a long way away, literally coming towards me and landing right in front of me. Actually filming the bird where it came from as well, to shore up the proof for me for the fact that is something they can do. Your Dan playing with a feather like that to that's what they all can do. Yeah.
So yes, he kept us going, you know, through the really tough times, you know.
So you were I know that you have these beautiful set of pictures on your wall of signs that you've had through. Such a great idea. So you were recording, you started to record these signs and connections, communications that you were getting?
Yeah, I started to write as soon as he passed, really, because that was part of my keeping in communication with him.
Did you write beforehand? Were you writing a lot before? Or
I've
did
always loved to write, but not to any great extent at that time, you know.
Right.
But I just felt like I was writing for guidance from my guides. I mean, I've always felt this sense of knowing I've got guides, knowing I've got a team, you know, around me, guardian angel, you know, spirit guides. So I know, and I sort of had communication with them previously to Dan passing. So I sort of reached out to those just to begin with, and I was just writing, you know, just show me how you can help me through this. So I was writing most days, and then
I'm going to just stop you here because you just got such a wealth of experience here. So how were you, this is like a form of automatic writing you're doing with your guides, etc. And you've also done with Dan. How do you just start writing and letting the words flow, trusting that they can potentially be a blend of you and them, or you actually feel them take? How does it work for you? And how do you, just for the sake of people that would like to give things like this a go at home, how would you suggest that people went about it, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I just asked a question. I think during those first few weeks, it was, how do I get through this?
Yeah.
Practically every day, just that. How do I get through this? And then I would just write.
What
And
would you
then
get back to that question?
One moment at a time,
That's
you know?
exactly what was going through my mind.
Yeah.
Yes.
One moment at a time. We guide you, we're here with you, we're supporting you. Just support, really, messages of support coming back, which, you know, was so important. And I was told to keep a gratitude journal, which I started, you know, within the first few weeks as well.
They told you?
Because,
They told you to
yeah, keep a gratitude journal. So that's what I started doing. So every morning, every night, I'd write 3 things I was grateful for or thankful for.
And what was there? Did they say why they wanted you to do that so early on? What the purpose
Because
of?
it sort of keeps your vibration up a little bit, you know, helps you to stop you falling down the rabbit hole, if you like, you know. So it was just um, to keep sane in a way, you know, just to keep sane, because grief can very easily, you know, drag you
Very.
down, as we all know here, you know. And there were times when, you know, it sort of threatened to do that to me, and I just felt that the gratitude journal was just keeping a grip on reality, because there's always something to be grateful for, you know. I
Yeah.
mean, I'd write the same things sometimes, you know, just like a bed to sleep in, you know, some warm food, you know, a kind word, you know, just things like that. But I made myself do it. And I kept doing that. It was a 6-month journal that I bought, and I kept it up for 6 months.
So you started that quite early on in your journey,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Interesting.
And I found that really, really helped, you know, just to get me through.
So what have been, you know, the milestones? We're coming up almost 5 years now. What have been your milestones in your journey of building your relationship with Dan in that time?
Well, he communicated with me through a medium about 4 months in, which was that was because even though I was hearing from him, there was always this, is it really you? You know, that element of doubt, you know, that creeps in, and I don't want it there, but it creeps in. So that really was a bit of a game changer, I would say. because I went to a medium demonstration. So I wasn't going for a one-to-one. I just went along with members of the family who were saying, look, come along, you know, maybe Dan will come through. And I didn't want to think too much about it because I didn't want to be disappointed. So I went along and I had the most excruciating migraine when I was there that I've never had before, never had it, never wanted. But it was right like where the third eye is. It just was like something shot into it, basically. And I just about made it through the whole of the demonstration because I've never felt such pain in my life. I don't know what that was. Still to this day, I don't know. But and the last one she came to was us. She came to my daughter first. And she said to my daughter, you've got a brother in spirit. And Amy said, yes. And she said, oh, he's here to tell you it's okay for you to grieve. And my daughter told me the week before that she didn't feel like she could grieve properly because she was always telling him off, basically, you know, for the trouble he used to get into. So she said, I don't feel like I should be able to cry. I don't feel like I got the right to cry for him, she said, because I should have been nicer.
No.
So he came through and said she got every right to grieve. And that, to me, even that one statement would have been enough for me to know it was Dan, you know, because of the circumstance, you know. But she went on to say so much. I mean, we hadn't had the coroner's report by then, so we really didn't know whether it was, whether he'd taken his life or whether it was an accidental overdose. But she said, oh, he's coming in here to tell you that it was the wrong mix. That's how he's telling me. It was the wrong mix. And but it was his time to go. And she said so much that like there was a hold on the funeral because they couldn't complete the autopsy. Things nobody would have known, you know, only the family knew that his funeral almost didn't go ahead because the day before, you know, they had to get another somebody else in to do the autopsy. So there was so much there that she said. So, and after the demonstration, when she was leaving, we were all still sitting there. She came over to me and she said, I saw your son walk in with you. Mm-hmm. She said he hasn't just popped in here because, you know, he knows this is a demonstration. He's come to have a chat. She said he walked in with you, and she said he'll always be with you. She said he's one of these ones that will always be around you. And she said her husband had died about 7 years before, I think, in his early 20s. And she said that's how she started, you know, this journey that she was on. And she said that's how her husband helped her, you know, because he came to her and she said, that's how I see your son. He's going to be helping you on this journey.
Have you seen Dan? I think you have, haven't you? Seen Dan?
Yeah, I saw him as a light being, though. That's how he appeared to me. That wasn't long after he passed, and I was meditating, and I don't know whether it was in my mind's eye or I'd opened my eyes. I couldn't say either way, but I just saw this and felt this light presence. And that sort of helped to change how I saw him, because like he wasn't his body, you know, so none of us are. So I think he wanted to show me like what he is now, you know, this is me now, this is my essence. And, you know, yes, you were attached to the body, you know, to what I looked like, but this is me now. And that's why I think he showed himself in that way. Yeah.
Was it like, I'm thinking, of someone else that's seen a light being as such, a very kind of solid light being. Was it quite solid, or was it more transparent? Or
It was so quick.
right,
And it was more the feeling I got. So it's difficult to explain because I think he wanted me to feel it, to feel
okay.
what he was, rather than, although I did see a big, it was a big, almost like filled the half of the room,
Okay.
you know?
Okay.
Mm.
Right. Interesting. That just, I don't know why. And of course, this is slightly different, but it reminds me of that video you took of like the mist
Yeah.
coming,
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
which is obviously something different, but that coming
Yeah.
from your room. Have you ever?
Yeah.
I have myself videoed, I call it like a spirit sort of mist a few times. Have you ever determined what that was? Have you ever done some writing and understood exactly what was happening there?
It was because they told me to film, so I get these
They told
nudges,
you,
you know.
your guides told you to film.
Yeah, yeah. It was
Right.
bedtime, and they said take your phone into the bedroom today and film. I got a little room off my bedroom which I use as a meditation room, and they said take a video in there tonight. So that's what it was, and I feel because there was something before that. I think I'd been on a meditation. It was something to do with you.
Yes, for some reason. Oh gosh, my memory's appalling. Yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah,
was something to do with you, and something like we'd been in a meditation, and something about some vision they'd given me of all of each soul being like a snowflake, because every snowflake is unique, and it
right,
was something that came like that. So that they said was like them showing all of them together, sort of.
right. Okay, okay, yeah.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
that's that brings me to thinking about the orbs, and
Hmm.
just a little backstory to this from me. Um, I believed that the orbs were absolutely a phenomena. And I discussed it with Val. I hadn't seen an orb, I hadn't experienced an orb, but Val had. And I don't know if you remember, you sent me a photo of
Hmm.
yourself with an orb in front of your knee.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it was just amazing. And I'll just tell everybody here, if you haven't had them, from there, I made a point of telling my team, and I would love to see an orb myself. I'd really like to see an orb. Months went by, and I made sure that I understood what lens flare was, dust and insects, etc. I was not going to attribute anything that was an orb to being one, but it took a long time. And then I started getting orbs too, and a lot of orbs. But you got orbs.
Hmm.
Did you have you experienced orbs before his passing, or was this something that happened for you since? Because we've not
Since,
really discussed it since.
yeah,
So
definitely more.
how did you come across the orbs? Did you just take a photo
Um,
one day and see it, or was it something you saw
yeah,
with your eyes?
I'd been I'd been listening to an interview with what's her name? Nancy. I can't think of her name now. She'd written a few books. She'd written a few
Right.
books on orbs,
Okay.
and I was listening to an interview, and she said how she photographs orbs, and she does it with a camera, not a phone camera. And she mentioned the camera, and I thought, I've got a camera like that. So I went searching for this camera that I haven't used for
And
years.
Shelley,
That's
Nancy
it,
Myers.
Nancy Myers. That's it. Yeah. I went searching for this camera, and of course it was out of charge. So I charged it up, and that was beautiful because there was more to it. Obviously, Dan was working his little bit of magic there, because on the camera was the last photograph I had taken with him. So I would never have found that
Have you not? Okay.
if I hadn't followed that trail of breadcrumbs to go back to that camera and
Oh, that's lovely.
charge it up. It was absolutely beautiful. Um, So that's what I did. So I thought, okay, I'll set the camera up and I'll just let it click away, you know. So
How
that's how I
far,
sort
do you
of did it.
remember how many years it had been after Dan's passing that you tried this?
Gosh, I mean, it was a good few years ago, so
Was.
a couple of years maybe after his passing, but good few years ago.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you got the camera and then
Yeah.
what? You took these.
Yeah, I just set it up. I started taking photographs in my lounge first of all, and then I thought, gosh,
Did you
yeah.
prepare, or did you say to Dan before Dan, I'm going to see if I can see if
Well,
you
I'm
can.
chatting to him all the time anyway,
Okay,
you
so
know.
he knows what you're trying to do. He
Yeah,
knows that you're
yeah,
trying to capture orbs. You've put it out there that this is what you're trying to
yeah,
achieve. So you'd
yeah,
set an intention effectively for what you were trying to achieve. So
yeah,
it's known, it's heard. And
yeah.
were you successful first time you tried, or was it something you had
Yeah,
to?
straight
Yeah,
away with our camera. Well,
right,
straight away, yeah, straight away. And I sent them to Nancy and I
right.
said, have a look at
I
these, you
remember
know.
that. Yes,
Yeah. I
yeah,
said, can you sort of confirm? And she said yes. And she said, you know, zoom in on them because she could see faces in them, you
yeah,
know. So yeah, so I did that for quite a while.
yes.
It was quite an interesting project that now I use my own the phone
I
or
know.
my phone video. You know, that's what I use now. But the camera started it off.
Yeah.
You know. Mm.
So and you that's just something you pick up and you do now and again because maybe we'll show on here, Dan,
Mm.
your video in your room and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I see orbs now with my out to the corner of my eye a lot,
Mm.
numerous times a day. I see them. You know, so I know they're there. I always say hello, wherever it is. You know.
It's
But
interesting because you hear that quite a lot from people. They see things in their periphery vision, but
mm,
they don't necessarily believe it to be anything. And there's somebody sitting in this room that I'm thinking of right now that didn't tell me they had seen that. And their child came through when I was doing a reading and mentioned it themselves.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that was me.
yeah.
I didn't say anything. So it's one of those things again with trust. And I think the more you believe that it's happening, the more you acknowledge it, the more that encourages them to do something similar. And if
It
you're,
is, and I think that's with signs in general because I always give it the benefit of the doubt. You know, that was my ethos from the beginning, if you like. That I don't question too much. If it's not from him, well, nothing lost. You know, that's not from you.
yeah,
Um, but if you're making an effort, then I'm going to acknowledge you. You know, and I feel like I don't know, maybe because I did that right from the beginning. Um,
also, and
then
I'm in here because I
signs
know,
signs were everywhere. You know,
but it does take for those two to tango with a lot of these signs. You had such a great communication with Dan from very early on that even if it's only subconscious, some of it seeps in and you are going to be in the right place at the right time for a particular sign to happen.
yeah,
There is that sort of two-way
yeah,
street aspect of a lot of signs. So if you're still learning to open up and to be able to feel and sense and get these knowings through, once you're there and you can all get there, that's when like you're describing more, you will get more.
and I used
You'll
to ask
be
for
aware.
specific signs. That was another thing because I was learning all the time, and I wanted to be. If he could do it, I wanted to get as adept as he was, you know, at recognizing them. So we had a little sort of game going, a bit like Donna has done now for the group, you know.
Yeah.
We'll have a sign of the week, you know. So that's how I did a lot. Okay, well, and I would just get myself quiet in a meditation. I would say, okay, what sign are we going to choose? And I would let him be a part of the deciding, you know. And that worked really well in the beginning because he would definitely bring through what, you know, was heard. You know, whether I thought of it or he thought of it, it didn't, there was no sort of
Well, if you remember,
differentiation. It was
the old-
just like, this is what it is. And it was like, okay. And then,
that's
I
it's
would just
quite a
watch out
difficult.
for it.
I did try and set up a sign of the week game, for want of a better word, in the group that we used to run, and that you were admin in, where everybody chose their times, with, as opposed to being one sign and everybody comes in with, and it can be a little more challenging doing that, I think. But again, when you have the openness, the awareness and the trust in it, you can ask for signs, and they will do their very best to bring you something.
I think the one that springs to mind that really still makes me chuckle is the one was rhinoceros was the sign of the week, rhinoceros.
Okay.
And it was almost, the week was up. It was on Saturday, and we had one more day, and I hadn't had my rhinoceros. And I went to a psychic development workshop. And as I was walking there, I said to Dan, right, you better bring me this rhinoceros sign, because I haven't had it yet. And there's only like today and tomorrow.
Yes.
There's only today and tomorrow to go. So we were in this workshop, which was really interesting. And there must have been, say, about 20 people there. And halfway through, we all broke for lunch, and we brought a packed lunch. So we were all sort of sitting around. And the medium who was taking the workshop, she says to this chap, are you a vegetarian? And he said, no, but I've given up eating rhinoceros.
Still makes me laugh to this day.
I know, you could have, I was like, my jaw must have dropped to the floor. and he sort of looked at his wife.
Did I say that?
Yeah. And then afterwards, I thought, I've got to tell him. So after the workshop was over, I said to him, you know what you said? Lunchtime. And he said, yeah. I said, I know what that was. He said, gee, he said, because I haven't got a clue. He said, why would I say, I've given up eating rhinoceros? So I explained then. And he said, oh my goodness. Well, thank you for telling me that.
Yeah.
Because he said, I had
absolutely
no idea why it came out of my mouth. And Dan has done that. He's done that quite a few times. He does.
Basically, for anybody that's wondering how that happens, they just have an influence. It doesn't necessarily always, come to be, but they just have an influence on what someone's saying. The rhinoceros story is just hysterical to me. I had a similar thing in my supermarket when somebody's talking to me, and in the middle of the sentence, without any context whatsoever, she said rainbow. And I looked up at her, what do you mean? And she almost seemed oblivious to the fact that she'd said rainbow in the middle of a sentence where it didn't belong. And I walked outside, and sure enough, there was a rainbow in the sky. They can do that. They can influence what someone else is saying. The rhinoceros stories, just so funny.
Well, my daughter, we were in a hotel, and that was another one. We were in a hotel. We'd gone away for a weekend on my birthday, actually. And we had a 3-course meal, and they had a beautiful sweet trolley. So they had all the desserts, all the cakes and everything, on this dessert trolley. And we were sort of looking at it, and we were both full, didn't really feel like anything. And I said, you want to have something? She said, well, yeah, of course, of course we are. So she said, I'm going to have profiteroles. And I said, oh, I think I'll have cheesecake. So that's how it was. So he came over then, the waiter, pushing this trolley. And he said, and what would you like? And she said, I'll have banoffee pie. And I said, and I love cheesecake. And then after he'd gone, then she said to me, I don't know why I said I'll have banoffee pie. She said, I don't even like it. I said, well, I thought you were on profiterole. She said, so did I. I said, well, banoffee pie is Dan's favourite dessert.
Indeed. Amazing.
We still laugh at that because, yeah.
Listen, before we go to some questions, Val, from others, just a couple of things that I'd like, that I know you've been through periods, or at least one that I know of, where you've not had, or you've not felt you've had a lot of communication with others. You've gone through what a quiet spell. It's gone quiet. Others experience that, and it can make you dread for the fact you think they've just left, or you're doing something wrong. For you, what have those quiet spells meant for you?
Well, he explained to me, or my guides explained to me, because it's happened quite a few times, because what they've said is this isn't just, and that's a part of the soul plan, because it's not just my journey with Dan, it's my journey as a soul as well. So I can rely too much on him, or I can invest too much time in him. So when I feel him not there, so he does pull back. That's how I've come to know it. But doesn't go. He's there, but he pulls back because I've got something to learn. So it makes me make more time for my own soul's expansion, if you like. That's what I've come to understand, you know. And then he'll come back in, you know.
Yeah. So basically he's helping you.
Yeah.
And that's a great way for people to think about it when they are used to having connection, communication, and a quiet period happens, is to perhaps look at it in that way. Exactly as you've just described it. Beautiful.
Yeah. What do I need to do? I mean, I'll obviously write to my guides, then what do I need to do? And that's what I get back.
Okay.
You know.
And one last thing before I will start reading the questions that I know are here. For somebody that's in their first 6 to 12 months, the first year, what would your suggestions be for not for twofold, for their grieving, but also to help them build a relationship?
Well, I think grief has got to have its expression. I mean, that's really, really important. I've learned you can't bypass it at all. It needs, and even now, coming up to 5 years, I can still have periods where I can feel in deep, deep grief. But it's okay, because I know that it's not going to last. I know I'm going to come out of it. So it's that knowing that it's impermanent. You know, the grief is impermanent. The feeling is impermanent. To read as much and learn as much about the afterlife. I mean, that's what I did from the get-go. I never stopped listening. Even that first or the next day, I was listening to podcasts, to videos, NDEs, everything. I must have read about 30 books, I think, in a couple of months.
Recommend off the cuff? Anything come to mind?
Heaven Therapy by Ross Bartlett.
Oh, okay.
One of my favorites, yeah. I'll put some in the group. But I just devoured things. And then he led me to Robert Schwartz, Your Soul's Plan. I think that was in the June. So he left at the end of April. So within about 6 weeks, I don't know how I came upon it. These things just weaved, don't they, you know? So I ordered the book, and I went into a coffee shop. I was working at the time, and at the afternoon off, and I went into the coffee shop, and I read this one chapter, and it was like a light bulb moment, you know.
Pop the details of Your Soul's Plan in here, because like you, and so, you know, our timings with our boys passing similar, and it was summertime, so maybe in Florida summertime starts here early. The time we passed in May, so we're talking maybe July time. A couple of months afterwards, I'm listening to the audiobook of The Soul's Plan.
Yeah.
A mind-blowing sign. I was painting the side of my house as I'm listening to it. And in a place where there shouldn't be coins, came across a very old 1997 coin, just as the audiobook is saying about piercing the veil. I see the outline of the coin in the ground and I pick it up. So that's both of us have had
Yeah.
important moments with that book, The Soul's Plan. It's an excellent read. It helps you understand a lot. Puts a lot of helps you understand the bigger picture potentially to all of this. And actually, if I remember rightly, it's got quite a big section on addiction, hasn't it? Or
Yeah, and it was that
mental.
actual chapter, yeah,
Okay,
with that. And the woman was called Valerie. I think that the boy was called
really?
Dustin, I think his name was. But yeah, it just spoke to me
Yeah.
loud and clear, and it changed the way that I viewed things completely. Then, and Dan is built on that. He's built on that in the subsequent years. The more I've come to understand it, it's just, and then everything started to make sense. You can go, I go back then, to this foreboding that I had, this need to protect him, this, this feeling that he was here for a special reason. It all made sense then.
Okay, there is a couple of things here. Somebody in relation to the orbs has asked where in the dark, was it in the dark? And
Not with the camera, no, that was in daylight. I didn't have to have anything dark. When I take them with my phone, I can have some light on.
yeah,
Yeah. But when you video, is to have the flash on. When you're taking a video, have the flash on. Yeah.
I'll add to that the ones that I see in my garden are in full daylight,
Yeah.
with the sun shining. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And I know with Nancy Myers, she will take them, in daylight. Yeah.
But
So
yeah, inside that you don't have to, like you say, full darkness. You can have some light.
yeah.
It's easier then. Rosie asks here, oh, what is your favorite meditation? Silent, guided, or music?
It depends. I go through phases, so it really depends. At the moment, music. If grief is really, really heavy, then I'll go for a guided meditation because that sort of helps to. If I'm listening to somebody guiding me, then my thoughts are not taking over. But before Dan went, it was always silent meditation. It was always in the silence, and I can do silence now, but sometimes just music, or it varies. Yeah.
I don't think there's any more questions unless you've got some more to send me, Alex. So I want to end by mentioning a little bit. Are you working on a new book at the moment?
Well, I've been working on a new book for a while.
Yeah. How's it
Yeah.
going?
On and off. Yeah, on and off. It sort of keeps changing direction. So it took me 2
I would
years.
imagine many people here will be a follower of your page, and you post a lot in there from your
Yeah.
existing book, etc. You write beautifully. You write at a level where I think anybody, no matter what type of loss they've experienced, can really connect. And they're so inspiring and uplifting as well. You really do have a wonderful way of expressing what it
Yeah,
feels.
I feel like that is almost channeled, if you like. That's what it feels like. It's almost channeled. If I like the Embracing Grief, it took 2 years to write it. I mean, Dan told me I was going to write it. Just came in one day and just announced you're going to write a book. And I didn't have any clue about writing a book. I didn't have any thoughts about writing a book, but he said you're going to be writing a book. So everything just sort of came, fell into place then, if you like, for me to learn how to write a book, which is why I did all the grief journals first.
Right.
Because that sort of set the scene for me to know how to self-publish. But 2 years it took to gather the bits together for that book, because I had to visit early grief. and that was, I had to revisit my writings from
Right.
from the early years, which was quite harrowing at times, and I had to stop and then restart, because like when you get to a certain stage, you don't want to go back to feeling like that. So but it was very cathartic. And my thought to begin with was that, yes, okay, I'll write a book, but it'll be for me. I'll be writing this just for me, because it will be a form of healing, But as it went on, I knew that it would.
Yeah, it's just come flash into my mind. This is from my team, something they told me in those very early days. You have to go into the darkness to see the light.
Yeah.
And they've just literally pinged me with that now. And it was such sage advice for me in those early days. You can't shy away from it. I literally had to walk into that darkness and then walk towards the light. And yeah, don't want to go back into that darkness again.
No. And sometimes even now when I pick up the book, because I do read the book every morning, I open it and read a page, and sometimes I read it and I think, oh, gosh.
But it does actually, just changing the subject slightly before we finish. We all, it goes back to the fact that our spiritual journeys are not sort of one straight line going upwards. A kind of spiral. And one way, if you want to see if you're making progress, is to look back not to last month or 6 months ago, but to at least a year ago. Where were you a year ago to here? That you can sort of usually see the growth, and in between those you can dip back to patterns that you used to have in dealing with this and address them from where you are now and learn something completely new.
And I think that's important. It's important to look back to see how far we've come, because it's not an easy journey at all, is it? It's
well, certainly everybody here
extremely
probably
difficult.
got the hardest journeys I think anybody has to walk.
Yeah.
And,
Absolutely.
Well, look, Val, thank you so much for coming and sharing your journey with everybody. If somebody wants to, if anybody would like to take themselves off mute and to thank Val yourselves, please do. Thank you for coming. And thanks so much to Val.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much,
I look
Val.
forward to your
Really
writings every day.
lovely.
Wonderful.
You've really helped on the journey.